A drill bit pushes through solid ground and suddenly drops into open space 90 feet beneath Oak Island. When the next core reaches the surface, pieces of wood are buried inside it, recovered from the same underground zone where water testing has already detected traces of gold. 24 hours later, a laboratory scan identifies something highly unusual in that wood. But before the team can understand what the result means, they face a more immediate question. Is the void beneath them a natural cavity, or have they finally crossed the roof of a hidden tunnel? Nearby, an old shaft contains a ladder shaped entirely by hand, another sign that people were working underground long before the modern search began. According to legend, Oak Island will not surrender its treasure until one final life is lost. But after 228 years of warnings and failed attempts, Rick and Marty Lagunina are no longer following only a legend. They are following a pattern. To understand how that pattern formed, the investigation begins at a freshly marked drilling point near the money pit. Paul looks across the site and predicts that this will be an exciting place to work. Around him, crew members position themselves beside a mark on the ground selected for the next borehole. Marty asks whether they are ready to bring in the rig. The answer is yes. The crew clears the immediate area and prepares the equipment. The location has been chosen through months of water testing. Marty explains that geoscientist Dr. Spooner and hydrogeologist Dr. Fred Michael believe they have isolated a particularly important zone. He gestures around the work site. The team is standing directly above it. An earlier meeting reveals how the target was defined. Dr. Spooner, the fair-haired specialist wearing glasses, speaks with visible excitement as the group reviews the sampling results. Water collected from boreholes throughout the money pit area suggested that the possible source of the precious metal readings might lie inside a zone measuring approximately 70 by 25 feet just west of the garden shaft. The team gave that larger target a simple name: the Blob. Dr. Michael adds that materials containing the detected metals do not appear to be spread randomly. Instead, the readings suggest that several possible sources may be clustered within a relatively limited area. Additional testing has now narrowed the target dramatically. The original blob has been reduced to a zone only 20 by 20 feet, between 80 and 120 feet below the surface. Dr. Spooner calls the refined target Blob 2.0. The rest of the crew has adopted a less formal name, the Baby Blob. At the present-day site, everyone studies a copy of the plan. The metal readings are only part of what makes the location compelling. The underground model also suggests that a possible tunnel may cross the area at approximately 95 feet, entering the same zone where the suspected treasure source could be located. That creates a rare opportunity. One carefully placed borehole might test the Baby Blob, the predicted tunnel elevation, and the relationship between the target and the garden shaft at the same time. Every line on the plan leads toward the same orange X. Marty does not want another discussion. He wants the rig. The new hole is designated DN 11.5. The team hopes it may encounter valuables below 80 feet, but even finding a structural feature would matter. Its path is expected to approach a suspected passage running beneath the garden shaft, where previous water testing detected trace evidence of gold. For months, the search has been conducted through samples, maps, and chemical results. Now the crew is finally preparing to test the ground itself. Marty says he wants them to find something meaningful, even if it is not the treasure that would end the hunt. Oak Island historian Charles Barkhouse remains at DN 11.5 to supervise the drilling while Marty steps away. The operation begins, and the rods start moving toward the Baby Blob. While Marty considers the descent a privilege. The Duma crew has already found something inside the shaft that connects the present operation with the people who worked there long ago: an old wooden ladder. Underground, Marty studies it closely. The ladder is undeniable evidence that earlier workers occupied the same confined space. Scott points to marks showing that the wood was whittled by hand. Whoever made it did not rely on a modern lathe or standardized construction. The object begins to feel like a treasure of its own. Very few people today would shape and assemble a ladder by hand, then carry it into a deep shaft. Marty and Scott imagine meeting its maker and asking what work had been important enough to justify that effort. The age of the garden shaft makes the question more provocative. The structure may have been built more than half a century before the original money pit was discovered. If that estimate is correct, the ladder may not have belonged to a later treasure hunter. It could have been left by someone involved in placing a valuable cache underground. That remains a theory, not a conclusion. But if an earlier depositor worked in this area, it could help explain the elevated precious metal readings detected around the shaft. A craftsman spent considerable time making the ladder. Why was it abandoned below unless the operation taking place there mattered? A flashback returns to drilling conducted 12 weeks earlier. At a borehole only 18 feet southwest of the garden shaft, the crew encountered a large void. They considered it possible evidence of an offset chamber. Now Scott has identified a slump inside the garden shaft at approximately the same depth. The deformation may be connected to the void found weeks before. If outward probe drilling reaches that area, the team could finally test whether another shaft, chamber, or tunnel lies immediately beyond the reconstructed structure. For years, the searchers have tried to understand the ground from the surface. The garden shaft may finally allow them to investigate the mystery from inside it. At DN 11.5, Charles Barkhouse and geologist Terry Matt watched the drill approach the potential treasure interval between 80 and 120 feet. Geoscientist Andy walks toward the tent to ask about their progress. Terry reports that the recovered interval now extends from approximately 78 to 88 feet. They are close. Then the sound of the rig changes. A harsh, grinding noise cuts through the worksite. It grows louder, forcing everyone to look toward the machine. The drill operator calls for an immediate stop and orders the rods pulled back. The bit has passed through something unexpected. To understand what happened, he measures the pipe. The reading shows approximately 1.5 feet of open movement. From the tent, Terry watches with concern, uncertain whether the equipment has failed or the drill has entered an underground cavity. The operator walks over with the explanation. At roughly 90 feet, the rods moved into hollow space. Terry repeats the key point so there can be no misunderstanding. DN 11.5 has encountered a void 90 feet beneath the surface. Charles, Terry, and Andy agree that drilling should pause while they examine the implications. Charles immediately calls Rick and Marty Laganina. For Rick, a call from the Money Pit drilling team always carries enormous weight. DN 11.5 lies inside the carefully defined treasure zone. The brothers and their partners have invested countless hours and large sums of money in this ground, guided by evidence that includes gold traces, trapped air, and underground voids. Rick drives directly to the site. When the team gathers in the tent, drill operator Mike describes the event in detail. At approximately 90 feet, he felt the rods push through the expected material and travel about 1.5 feet farther than they should have. He suspects that material penetrated by the drill may have fallen into the open space below. The discovery creates excitement and concern at the same time. If the void contains something valuable, could the drilling have caused it to shift or drop deeper? Terry opens a map and compares DN 11.5 with DN 12.5 and DN 13.5. The three boreholes form an east-west line. Each has encountered something unusual at approximately 94 feet. 3 holes, nearly the same depth. One alignment pointing toward the garden shaft. Terry concludes that Mike may have reached the top of a tunnel. If the interpretation is correct, the crew has not found 3 unrelated openings. The boreholes may have crossed different sections of one underground structure. The possible connection to the Baby Blob immediately becomes more important. The same area has produced strong gold-related readings. If a tunnel enters that zone, it could offer a route toward the source, or a path through which material has moved. Marty will not accept a promising map as proof. The team needs physical evidence. He instructs Mike and Colton to recover a core capable of showing whether the drill encountered a tunnel, disturbed construction material, or something connected to the treasure theory. The operators return to the rig. Rick reflects on what these moments do to him. Every time a drill bit enters open space, his mind moves toward the possibility that the team has reached something important. That hope has driven the search through years of uncertainty, one clue at a time. This void feels especially personal. Rick has spent years seeking not only treasure, but an explanation for the island's mystery. As Mike lowers the equipment, Colton prepares to extract the next sample. Terry and Charles stand ready to open it. Rick explains that finding a tunnel beside the garden shaft or striking the passage at its base would be a massive breakthrough. The next core will show what lies approximately 98.5 feet below the surface. Mike reports that the open interval ended at about 97 feet. The sample is brought into the tent and carefully split. At first, the material appears ordinary. Then the crew sees wood. Solid pieces are embedded in the center of the core. The find immediately changes the mood. Wood at that depth may indicate human activity, although its origin is unknown. Within the team's treasure theory, one possibility is that it came from a wooden chest or container. That idea is not proven, but it no longer seems impossible after the handmade ladder inside the garden shaft showed how well substantial woodwork can survive underground for decades and perhaps more than a century. Terry removes a fragment, seals it in a sample bag, and prepares it for laboratory testing. The question is no longer only where the wood came from. The team wants to know what it contains. 24 hours later, Rick and Craig Tester arrive at the Oak Island Interpretive Center. They meet archaeologist Lair Nan and archaeometallurgist Emma Culligan for one of the most anticipated reports of this stage of the investigation. Emma has examined the wood recovered from the suspected tunnel zone approximately 90 feet underground. The crew still cannot determine whether the void is natural or man-made, but an unusual chemical result could give the sample greater significance. She explains the process. The wood was dried, then scanned with an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, or XRF. According to the reference, the instrument uses gamma rays to identify even extremely small quantities of metallic elements. Emma begins cautiously. The scan detected something unusual, but the amount was so small that she repeated the test several times before trusting the result. The room quiets as she displays the elemental list. Most of what appears is common on Oak Island: iron, magnesium, titanium, calcium, potassium, and aluminum. Then Emma reaches the outlier: gold. Rick and Craig immediately ask whether that element is unusual in a wood sample. Emma confirms that it is highly unusual. She laughs and describes the reading as a very large outlier. On the chart, gold appears as the 12th element out of 14. It is among the smallest quantities detected, but the signal remains present after repeated testing. For Rick, the importance lies in the agreement between separate kinds of evidence. Water from the target area contains traces of gold. Now, wood recovered from the underground void contains gold as well. The result does not identify a treasure chest or prove that the opening is a tunnel, but it gives the team a more focused direction. This is why the sequence matters. The water program narrowed the search to the blob. Additional testing reduced it to the Baby Blob. Drilling entered open space, a core recovered wood. The laboratory found an element that should not ordinarily be there. Each clue led directly to the next. The combination of gold in the water and gold in the recovered wood becomes the team's greatest find of the year. Any confidence that had begun to weaken is renewed by evidence that appears consistent across both sample types. Rick sees the discovery as the beginning of a trail, not the end of the investigation. He also draws an important distinction. The team does not find samples in a laboratory. It finds answers there. Before leaving, Rick and the others promise Emma that more material will be coming. The search now involves more than excavation. The crew is also considering how carefully its work and information should be kept from wider attention as the evidence becomes more sensitive. One gold-bearing wood sample, however, could still be an anomaly. To determine whether a real pattern existed, the team needed material from another part of the same underground system. The garden shaft was already producing it. The next phase begins near the money pit, where Rick and his son Alex enter an outdoor monitoring tent. Screens and equipment have been arranged so the team can follow work inside the garden shaft without descending into it. Brandon Vanderhoff of Dumas Contracting Limited supervises the probe drilling operation as a crane lowers equipment into the shaft. The operation has been highly anticipated. For the first time during this stage of reconstruction, the Dumas crew will drill outward beyond the shaft walls, searching for clues, valuables, or man-made structures hidden just outside the timber lining. The garden shaft is an old, deteriorated structure built and later abandoned decades earlier by another group of explorers who came to Oak Island in search of wealth. Dumas is now rebuilding it level by level. The work matters because water collected around the shaft has produced elevated trace evidence of gold. Drilling has also suggested that a possible chamber associated with the original money pit may lie only a short distance away. Rick hopes the shaft will eventually give the crew something solid and valuable rather than another indirect signal. He has often been the person who lifts morale when seasons of searching fail to produce a final answer. In his mind, this is where the treasure hunt truly begins. Everything before it, the research, drilling, sampling, and repeated setbacks, prepared the team for the opportunity now opening inside the shaft. In the monitoring tent, Alex tells Brandon that previous drilling near the structure encountered a void. Brandon appears surprised. The reaction raises a question about how much information the Oak Island team has shared with the contractors responsible for the reconstruction. A flashback shows Marty asking how much of the final 30 feet the earlier drilling may have missed. The operator estimates that approximately 10 feet were not accounted for. Marty immediately looks toward Rick. The missing interval strengthens his suspicion that the drill passed beside an offset chamber. Earlier that summer, the crew penetrated a void approximately 10 feet high, several feet southwest of the garden shaft. Marty speculated that the opening could contain the long-rumored money pit treasure vault. The theory remained unconfirmed, but the size and location of the void made it impossible to ignore. Back in the present, Brandon explains that the underground crew is aligning the probe drill. From above, the work is difficult to see clearly, so every movement is followed on the monitor. Dumas has reconstructed the garden shaft to approximately 55 feet. From that depth, workers will manually drill several holes outward through the lining, attempting to relocate the known void and recover material from whatever lies inside it. Rick tells Brandon that if the drilling reveals a connection, the contractors need to know as soon as the Oak Island team does. Alex adds that if luck is with them, the operation may finally provide the truth that day. The equipment is a powerful hydraulic earth drill designed to penetrate hard clay, sediment, and rock. The target cannot be seen, so the crew must increase its chances through geometry. 3 holes will be drilled through each of the shaft's 4 walls, a total of 12. Different angles will expand the underground coverage and reduce the chance of passing beside the void. Any evidence of construction, an object, or unusual material could move the investigation forward. The Dumas workers collect soil samples methodically as the probe drilling continues. Above ground, Rick, Alex, and Brandon watch every movement on the screens. Then Rick recognizes another opportunity. Each probe must first cut through the tightly fitted wooden lining of the garden shaft. Rick asks Brandon whether those wood fragments can be saved rather than discarded. He explains the request carefully, making sure it does not sound like an unreasonable demand on the contractors. His plan is to send the shavings to Emma Culligan for XRF analysis. If water outside the shaft carries gold-related material, the wood may have absorbed traces of it. Rick compares the lining to a sponge. It has remained in contact with moisture inside the shaft for years. If minerals move through that water, the organic material might preserve a chemical record of the exposure. Earlier water samples had already shown gold. The wood could provide an independent way to test the same theory. It is a simple strategy, but an important one. The team does not need to wait for the probe drill to recover a chest or a constructed wall. Even debris produced by the reconstruction may carry information. Charles enters the tent, eager to follow the underground work. Because the Oak Island team cannot accompany the Dumas crew into the shaft during this phase, the monitor is their only immediate view. Rick soon prepares to leave. He is taking the collected water, soil, and wood samples to Emma at the Oak Island Interpretive Center. While the drill continues below, the laboratory will begin testing evidence already in hand. As core drilling proceeds at the money pit the next morning, the investigation shifts briefly to Lot 26. This side operation may not reveal where the underground treasure zone lies, but it could offer a clue about who built features on the island and how they concealed their work. Rick stands with forestry technician Peter Romke, Lair, and Rick's nephew Peter beside what first appears to be a pile of stones. The group has concluded that it is the remains of a constructed wall. Rick explains that Romke has studied the feature throughout the morning and developed a theory about its design. Although his professional career is in forestry, Romke has long been interested in stonework and has built walls himself. That practical experience shapes what he sees. The outer rocks angle inward. Romke identifies this as an old-world technique used to stabilize rubble walls. He is equally interested in the smaller stones at the base, which may reveal how the foundation was prepared. According to Romke, similar methods were once used for castles and large buildings in England and Scotland. Builders would dig below the frost line, fill the trench with coarse gravel, and then construct the wall above it. The feature at Lot 26 appears to follow the same general pattern. If that interpretation is correct, the stones were not placed casually. They reflect planning, structural knowledge, and skilled labor. The question is, who possessed that knowledge on Oak Island, and what they were building or hiding? Rick points toward a well-like feature only a few feet from the wall. Other known wells on the island were constructed differently, making this one especially interesting. 1 week earlier, Terry Dvow, identified as president of the New England Antiquities Association, inspected the rock well. He explained that wells of this type had been built for centuries, with examples extending as far back as the 11th century. He also noted that the Oak Island feature resembles a well at New Ross. That comparison returns the story to 2016. In the flashback, Rick watches a man test a well at New Ross, approximately 20 miles north of Oak Island. Researchers believe a fortress may once have been constructed there by members of the Knights Templar. According to legend, the Templars transported sacred treasures and guarded secrets from Scotland to the New World more than 7 centuries ago. The same tradition claims that they eventually concealed those materials on Oak Island. The resemblance between the wells does not prove that the Templars reached the island. It does, however, give the team another reason to consider whether people with old-world construction knowledge worked there centuries ago. At the wall, Romke, Rick, Peter, and Lair consider another possibility. The stones may have come from the excavation of an underground tunnel. If workers removed rock and soil from below, they would have needed to dispose of the spoil without revealing where the tunnel began. Romke theorizes that the excavated material could have been spread across the land and organized into a wall. Instead of leaving one obvious pile, the builders may have disguised the evidence as an ordinary surface structure. The group agrees that the wall appears intentional. Its layout is too organized to look random. But Rick's nephew Peter identifies the remaining weakness in the theory. Lair still needs to find an artifact that can connect the construction to a specific period or group. The stones suggest deliberate work. The identity of the builders remains unknown. Attention returns to the garden shaft the following morning. Charles meets probe drilling supervisor Brandon Vanderhoe at the money pit and asks for an update. Brandon explains that the crew is preparing the final probe attempt before reconstruction moves to the shaft's next level. Charles watches as the drill cuts through the last section of wall. He repeatedly asks whether the Dumas crew has encountered anything unusual. Brandon reports that nothing important has appeared. Then the drill stops advancing. Approximately 11 feet beyond the wall, the bit strikes something solid. The obstruction may be a simple rock, but it could also be a structural element hidden in the surrounding ground. The operators pause to protect the equipment and attempt to recover enough material to identify the barrier. The drill bounces repeatedly against it. Above ground, the Oak Island team and the Dumas contractors wait under the same pressure. A sample finally reaches the surface. It contains no clear sign of human involvement. After the strong run of discoveries, the result is disappointing. Charles does not treat it as the end of the theory. The final probe failed to identify construction, but it also did not explain the larger void or the precious metal evidence. He remains convinced that the garden shaft has more to reveal and argues that the only answer is to continue deeper. The following morning, the full Oak Island team gathers beneath an open-air tent near the money pit. Core samples lie across the work table. Emma Culligan approaches carrying the results from materials Rick collected during the first probe drilling operation. She arrives smiling and swings several plastic sample bags into view. Emma begins explaining that one of the pieces is small enough for a map scan. Rick interrupts and asks what exactly she has placed on the table. Emma laughs, slightly embarrassed. In her excitement, she began with the testing method before identifying the sample. The material is wood from the inner lining of the garden shaft. It came from the timbers installed along the shaft wall at a depth of 55 feet. Emma has detected gold in it. The announcement immediately validates Rick's decision to preserve the drill shavings. Water from the surrounding area had already produced gold-related readings. Now the wood lining appears to carry a related signal. Marty asks how confident Emma is in the result. She answers without hesitation. According to the reference, she considers the test completely reliable and confirms it with 100% certainty. Marty looks around the table and says, "Well, there you go." Terry asks whether the particles appear to have bonded with the organic material, the wood itself. Emma gives the measured level as 0.11%. She acknowledges that the number sounds small, but says it represents a significant presence. Marty asks whether it should be considered a large value. Emma explains that the measurement also involves parts per billion, which makes the reading substantial in that scientific context. The source does not reconcile the difference between those units, but the team accepts the result as meaningful. The discussion immediately turns to verification. The wood should be compared with water samples and with other material recovered from the area. One result is important. Repeated results from independent sources are far more powerful. Terry jokes that Emma has a special ability, the power to find gold. The group laughs. Marty calls the result extraordinary and admits that he is over the moon. Alex and Emma discuss what the analysis could mean, while Marty focuses on how the separate clues are beginning to form a clearer picture. In his mind, the evidence is becoming almost like a map, showing the team where to investigate next. Rick brings the conversation back to the principle that has guided the modern search. Science must remain at the center of the treasure hunt. Emma's analysis has invigorated the group, and Rick points to the smiles around the table. The garden shaft, he reminds them, offered a chance to learn from the failures of earlier searchers, but that opportunity required intelligence, patience, and humility. The team could not force the island to give them an answer. It had to recover evidence and allow the evidence to lead. Rick begins a round of applause for Emma. She turns away modestly, slightly embarrassed by the attention. The significance of the two wood samples is now impossible for the team to ignore. The first came from the suspected underground feature near 90 feet. The second came from the garden shaft lining at 55 feet. Different depths, different recovery methods, the same unusual element. Gold has appeared in the water, gold has appeared in wood recovered from the void, and gold has appeared in timber from inside the garden shaft. None of those results proves that a treasure chamber lies below. They do not identify who built the underground features or whether the void is natural, a tunnel, or an offset chamber. The ladder, the wall, the well, and the Templar connection remain pieces of a much older and still unconfirmed story. But the evidence is no longer scattered across the island without direction. Several independent clues now point toward the same concentrated ground, and beneath the garden shaft the excavation is still moving deeper.